This is the story of La Coupe des Alpes, the International Alpine Rally of 1958, which between July the 7th and 12th covered 2,400 miles of mountainous country in France and Italy in an unremitting struggle against the clock. The route was divided into 3 distinct stages. The first, from Marseille to Brescia, a little over 600 miles, was virtually non-stop for 18 hours. Across an endless succession of passes, several climbing to over 8,000 feet, through miles of narrow gorges on little-known roads, with no less than 20 time controls, each to be reached at speeds of the order of 1 kilometer per minute. Small wonder that by the time we reached the autodrome at Monza, there were only 40 of us left from the 64 who started, and of those but 14 were still in the running for a Coupe des Alpes, so far unpenalized for being late against the clock. Leading the rally cavalcade and the triumph entry of 90 hours was the redoubtable Irish driver Paddy Hopkirk, who now sets off for the special test at this, the home of the Italian Grand Prix. Meantime, the American Bob Halm, on his first Alpine, describes his rescue of a crew which went over the edge in the darkness, and accounts for the modified coachwork on his own machine. The Monza test was virtually a race round 3 laps of the 3.5-mile circuit. A maximum time of 7.5 minutes was allowed for the Triumphs class, just over 85 miles an hour for the lap, to escape penalty. And even 1/10 of a second outside the limits spelled the loss of a Coupe des Alpes. But there were bonus marks to be gained for the fastest times. The French girl Annie Swasbo was the Triumph's bid for the ladies' prize, and for her this sort of thing is what a new hat is to the less courageous of her kind. But the ladies' prize is no giveaway show these days. There's Nancy Mitchell following Annie onto the circuit, and on a rally, Nancy doesn't like to follow anyone at any time. The cars were grouped roughly into classes for the racing, and prominent now amongst the smaller cars was the Standard 10 of Cyril Korbishley, as usual the thorn in the flesh of the Continental Light Brigade. It's all right, man, there's lots of room. Mind you, it was still early in the morning. We'd left Marseille the previous afternoon, and the time had come for something to steady the morning sickness. Now let's not mess about, Jimmy Ray. But the first stage was not completed yet, and there were 2 more times to be punched at controls on that precious route card. It was typical of the event that the apparently simple run from Monza to Brescia was plotted on elusive minor roads, and at Alpine averages, there never is much room to maneuver. 1 mistake, 1 second lost, and your Alpine Cup is lost till another year. And here we see a tragedy. For Mary Handley Page and Lola Grimes, having survived the night unpenalized, got lost in the maze of traffic and failed to make their time. Bad luck, but that's the way it is when you're up against the clock. At Brescia, of the 64 starters, but 38 cars were left under guard for the 16-hour rest period. And for once, Maurice Gazzonaides, Alpine Cup winner in the previous 2 consecutive events, was missing from the Triumph team, one of the crashes of the night. A driver left alone to sleep recovers, but after their hammering, many of these cars were in need of more active help, which is forbidden on the Alpine. The second stage led immediately to the old familiar enemies of the Alpine driver. A short, hard run in the early morning light, and then the Vivione. Still leading the way and unpenalized, Hopkirk and Scott with their TR3. Also unpenalized and driving with cool efficiency, number 403, Keith Balisette, a distinguished newcomer to the Alpine, is chased by Ward, about to modify his left front wing. Desmond Titterington from Belfast, who allows that even the Circuit of Ireland has nothing quite like this. What of the gentle sex? Here's Annie Swasbo. And this is Pat Moss in Brother Sterling's well-blazed trail. While Jack Sears, if he didn't have other things to think about, with Nancy Mitchell on his tail, might well feel hemmed in. Twice victor at Le Mans, Ivor Bueb. The dashing Frenchman, Claude Storres. And Bob Howell, like the soul of his distinguished countryman, marches on. The man who in 1956 won the Monte Carlo Rally, Ronnie Adams, another Ulsterman. His car bears witness to a close introduction to a fellow competitor. And now watch closely as Frank Brown's co-driver, Gordon Shanley, is momentarily deceived by the deep shadow on this treacherous corner. But press on, says Frank, we're still motoring. Edward Harrison, reigning British Trials champion, carries on the family motoring tradition. And Tommy Wisdom, who somehow finds time to write the story for about a dozen editors as well, and was partnered by fellow journalist Jack Hay. And there's something for Tommy to write about. I wonder if the Frenchman Capraven remembers that last time the Alpine passed this way, those railings weren't there. Cyril Corbishley once again demonstrates his tremendous skill and the outstanding performance of his Standard 10. Mary Handley Page, undaunted by yesterday's misfortune. Alpine veteran George Hartwell, who always finishes. And the star of his team, leading the European Championship, Peter Harper. From the Vivione to the Stelvio, highest of all the high Alpine hazards at over 9,000 feet, and once again a special test against the clock. Now Paddy Hopkirk, with a punctured rear tyre, displays his Irish temperament. To stop and change that wheel before the end of the timed section of the summit would certainly cost him his Alpine Cup. As it is, there's just a chance. Meantime, Keith Balisette whisks his way above the snow line to make fastest time of the day. Once past the timekeepers, Hopkirk and Scott wrestle with the ruined wheel. But the next control is at the very foot of the pass, and the section is flat out for even the finest driver with luck on his side. Hopkirk knows the hazards of the steep and slippery descent which now confronts him, but not for nothing do we call this man Paddy. Incredible to relate, the Stelvio was open to normal traffic during the Alpine climb, but fortunately Desmond Titterington, as he encountered this happy tourist, was out of earshot. Increasingly, the Alpine becomes numerically dominated by the British entry, for the manufacturers with the courage to compete recognize it as worthy of their maximum effort. And fierce rivals though they may be, there is a community of spirit amongst the British teams. Its summit well above the summer snow line means that the Stelvio is invariably wet on its upper hairpins. It's steep too, but you'll have to accelerate hard downhill if you're to make the Bormio control against the clock. Accelerate, hold your breath, brake, change down, slide, accelerate. And all the time, you can almost hear the seconds tick away. Despite the minute or 2-minute intervals at which they start a stage, this sort of thing is not uncommon. And though balking is rare amongst Alpine drivers, in a situation like this, both invariably lose time. Oh, well held, John Spritzel. Annie Swasbo crashed on the climb. She tries desperately to recover elusive seconds, but the fan is pushed into the radiator and the engine seizes at the next control. And in the sudden darkness of the Stelvio tunnels, where the road surface turns to slippery rock, more than one hope has been extinguished in the past. Immediately after the Stelvio comes the Gavia, almost as high at over 8,500 feet, and by common consent, the most frightening of the 70 named passes on the route. It's 26 miles from control to control. The time allowed for the triumphs was 57 minutes. And if that sounds easy, well, how does it look from the driver's point of view? "38 cars completed the Stelvio section, but only 33 arrived at Marseille, the end of the second stage, and a merciful rest of 26 well-earned hours. The early morning of the rally's 5th day found the few surviving competitors high in the French Alps on the Col du Frêne, with nearly 100 miles of the final stage already behind them. But it was still 400 miles to Gap, a 3-hour rest, and then another 570 miles to the finish at Marseille. Still, the pace remained as swift. 1 kilometer to be covered in every minute, an easy sum for the navigator to calculate, but a cruel task for the driver and a merciless caning for the car.
10,
No less than 32 controls had to be made on time to the second, and the route card stamped in the time clock admits no argument. The distance per stage was never more than 40 miles, usually about 30, and sometimes as little as 12. Until it has been experienced, the cumulative effect of this constant struggle is hard to imagine. Progressively, nothing seems to matter anymore, except what time is it, how far is it to the next control, and how many minutes do we have to get there? This was the 7th control at the end of a 30-mile section on scarcely known minor roads across 3 vicious little passes in quick succession. John Sprinzel's partner, Willie Cave, was thinking in terms of seconds. The Italian Passaglio seemed less concerned and in fact had lost more time already, but was still in a hurry. Ray Brooks was in a hurry too. But Cyril Corbishley and the Standard 10 at least appeared to have matters well in hand. But now the cars call for more and more attention. Time must be won from the schedule and further effort expended on maintenance to keep on the road at all. But Alfa Romeo remains imperturbable as ever. Once again, what of the ladies? Pat Moss displays the family characteristic of determination. And even Nancy Mitchell looks, for once, a shade disheveled. Brian McCauldin apparently took the wheel from Desmond Titterington on this stage, for on the Alpine, both occupants must be capable of driving their car really fast. Frank Grimes determined to finish if he and Shanley have to carry the thing. And after all, what's a missing door or two? So the exhausting miles were whittled down, stage by stage, minute by minute, and the number of cars still running steadily decreased. John Gott lost a wheel, Ivor Bueb crashed, the sole surviving AC retired, the gallant Cyril Corbishley was forced out when his gearbox seized, and the Swedish driver Andersson, well placed in the European Championship, was not to see the finish. Cuth Harrison was still motoring, though penalized. But Keith Ballas at number 403 had so far brought his TR3 through every control on time, and Desmond Titterington now lay second to his teammate in the class. Pat Moss, though penalized now, was leading the ladies, but worried sick by oil from a breather causing clutch slip. Bob Helm's schedule was as battered as his triumph, but the American refused to quit. 100 miles from the finish came the last of the special sections on the road, the 13-mile timed climb of Mont Ventoux, which towers over 6,000 feet in the western Maritime Alps. Here, more than one exhausted crew wondered vaguely how they'd got to North Africa, and anyway, they'd motored far enough. This was a speed test, as its predecessors at Monza and Montrebat, a maximum time allowance to be beaten to stay clear of penalty, and bonus marks for the fastest times by classes. There had also been so-called regularity tests on the Alos and Izoard, where a minimum as well as a maximum time was set. But for all practical purposes, these were flat out the whole time anyway. Peter Harper now looked well set for his first Alpine Cup after so many gallant efforts in the past. Keith Balasat found Mont Ventoux no problem. Desmond Titrington, though tired, was happy in his work. Tommy Wisdom, whose immense experience had helped to get him this far, was driving to preserve his tires, another critical factor at this stage. And now, the run into the finish, still at the same swift 1 kilometer per minute rate of progress. Ahead, the final test, the scrutineering, things to remember, things to do, and mind and muscle slowed by heat and fatigue, and the relentless struggle against the clock. Borley Park, on the outskirts of Marseille, and only 25 cars were counted at the last control. Of these, no less than 20 were British, 1 French, and 4 Italian. Edward Harrison was one of the 7 unpenalized. Capraven drove the only French car to finish this French classic. Balasat and Titrington's Triumph TR3s preserved the marque's reputation in this rugged event. Frank Grounds and Gordon Shanley got there. And John Sprinsel and Willie Cave had used a tin opener to win their class. But still, there was the final test, another race round 5 laps of the rough and broken 1-mile circuit named after Jean-Pierre Vimille. John Sprinsel treated the whole thing like a Continental Brands hatch. Balasat was once again swift and faultless. Peter Harper made the fastest time in his class. Pat Moss knew she had but to finish to win the ladies' prize. Tommy Wisdom was certain of second place to Sprinsel in his class. "25 finishers, 7 Alpine Cups, a prize-giving ceremony of which those who participated may be justly proud. To the modified Alfa Romeo Giulietta of Frenchman Consten and de Longinest, first place in general classification. Keith Balasat and Berthaud won a Coupe des Alpes and the keenly contested class for Grand Touring cars over 1600cc. In other words, the fastest and biggest sports cars of the world. To the Ulstermen, Desmond Titrington and Brian McCaldin, further honours to their ever-growing score of success. Their TR3 was second in the class to Balasat's. And in the ladies' prize, again a happy continuity of family tradition. Pat Moss proves she's not just basking in reflected glory, and Anne Wisdom starts young in the distinguished footsteps of her parents. And pop looks pleased for every reason. Nancy Mitchell, reigning European Ladies Touring Champion, this time takes second place to her teammate Pat Moss. John Sprinsel and Willie Cave, collecting the silverware for their class victory, resolve to have that tin opener gold-plated. This, La Coupe des Alpes of 1958, will be known as the toughest Alpine, one of the few remaining links with the great road races of the past, an event in which courage, skill, determination, and an exceptional car were the prerequisites of success against the clock.